Welcome all to our second of our subcommittee to address pesticide concerns in the Arvin Lamont AB 617 community. We are so glad you're all here. I'm going to share on the screen the agenda. I'll share it in English and in Spanish, and I'll probably go back and forth a little bit. And this agenda was put together based on feedback from you all, from the co-leads and some other folks from the committee that have been very involved in the pesticide measures and moving this subcommittee forward. So I'm sharing my screen right now. The meeting has officially begun, and just like last time, we wanted to acknowledge all of the different agencies and partners that are a part of this meeting. So we have our co-leads that helped us, of course, the district, Department of Pesticide Regulations, CARB, Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, and the Ag Commissioner, all a part of this meeting. And so I'll just share this really quickly in Spanish as well. The next thing that we're going to go over after just a quick sort of welcome right now is one of the action items from our last meeting was to present to you all a tracker of all of the commitments that we laid out in the SERP. And so we have that for you today. Hopefully those of you who typically get paper copies have that in front of you, and we will continue to send that out before every pesticide meeting. We might continue to adjust it. We have some target dates for when we're gonna have discussions. So those might ebb and flow, but we also wanted to indicate what's already been complete or is in progress. So we're really excited to share that. We're also going to share, based on last meeting, one of your main concerns was how do we make sure folks know how to report pesticide incidents or have questions about potential exposure. We have a discussion about that today. So that's right here at 4:30. And then finally, we wanted to have a discussion about the use of pesticides in your community. That is one of the SERP commitments. So we're going to check that off the box today. It's a little bit of a review, but it's really important because it helps set up really the rest of the different SERP measures like monitoring or mitigation within the boundary. So that's kind of how we'll wrap up the meeting. And then of course, we'll take open floor for comments or suggestions or next steps. So with that, are there any questions about the agenda for today? Awesome. Well, we're really, really excited. I'm going to stop sharing my screen when I transition to the next piece. Like I said, the agenda and the next set of slides that I'm about to show you not only are posted online, but are also a part of the packet that we sent out. So I am going to share my screen and high level. So I'll come back to this slide, but this is sort of an overview of what we want the next few meetings to be based on input from you all as to what the SERP commitments are and input from our partner agencies as to when we can start at least introducing the concepts of some of these different discussions. So we'll come back to this, but we kind of put this at the top of the slide as a reminder of where we want to continue to go and kind of what the next steps are. So I wanted to quickly review. We do not need to go into depth here, but I just wanted to let you know that we followed through on the commitments that you all asked, which is we took the entire SERP. So none of this is new. These are all the same commitments you saw in the SERP, the same responsible parties. And we just broke it down into the individual bullet points and then marked off what we felt was complete. That doesn't mean it's the last time we'll talk about it, but in terms of the commitment to deliver something, this is kind of what that X means. So in this case, today is the day we are talking about these two things. That doesn't mean we won't ever talk about them again, but it's sort of an indication that we're moving forward with the SERP commitments. We also, based on these feed into kind of the rest of the measures. And so you'll see places where we think we can start to talk about them. That doesn't mean they will be complete by those dates. It's just the next time we'll talk about them in the subcommittee. As we move forward, again, hopefully several of you have this packet. I don't know if you already did it because I see a chat comment. Eric, if you can drop the link to this in the chat, that way folks can follow along after I'm done. As we move forward, you can see these are the different pieces related. Again, this is all in the SERP, and these are the dates we propose to at least have the discussion in the subcommittees about them. Some of them are follow-ups to one another, meaning, for example, evaluate the potential risks based on air monitoring results. That might not even happen until after 2024 because it sort of has to follow in succession. We have to plan the monitoring, we have to conduct the monitoring, we have to then analyze the monitoring. So you can see these are really plans that, you know, these dates might get pushed out or we might move forward together, but we'll just be transparent with you all as we work with our partner agencies on how we move forward with these. Again, some of these are complete in the sense that we started to update. That doesn't mean, again, we won't talk about them. We can just update this every time we have a discussion. In this case about notification, we'll keep talking about the next steps and where we're at with those. And some of these are going to be ongoing. For example, opportunities for feedback and engagement, that's never going to be complete. That will constantly happen, and we'll probably talk about it every single meeting. And then finally, these last two sections are scheduled to hopefully be discussed at least in some capacity at some really soon meeting. So in this case, in January, which would be our next meeting, as well as some meetings sometime in the spring to talk about enforcement. Hopefully you all find this helpful. It will help us, you know, hold us as the district, DPR, CARB, OEHA, the Ag Commissioner, all of us accountable to you all, and then also hold you all, or hold kind of us as a team together to understand how the rest of the meetings will go. And help us all hopefully feel really accomplished as we slowly but surely check off all of these boxes and hopefully fill this all up completely. I am going to stop sharing. Again, this is in the chat. And like I said, for those of you, typically the folks that are monolingual Spanish speakers or have folks in their homes that prefer to speak Spanish, you should have received a hard copy. Please put something in the chat if you didn't receive a hard copy and you want to start receiving hard copies. We are happy to keep sending those out to folks. And like I said, we'll send one out before every meeting kind of from here on out. Any questions about the process? Any questions about any one of these commitments? Well, I just want to think, I definitely have to give kudos to Gustavo Aguirre Sr., who was sort of the main impetus for this ask. I think it's really important. We have the main SERP measure tracker, but because this measure in particular has so many sub bullets, I think this is a really important part of the measure. And I just want to thank you, Gustavo. And I see your hand, so please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm on my phone, so I'm limited. But yeah, I think one comment that I have is about what you mentioned, Jessica, about you know, the kind of mitigation you know, options, you know, as you mentioned that may come after 2024, which in, you know, in one hand I understand that, but I think in the prior meeting that we had, it was mentioned that I think DPR, at least maybe other agencies, already had some information, you know, even prior to, you know, with information that they collected prior to 6/17. Yes. And I was thinking, is there a way that we can start identifying some you know, mitigations based on that information that is already exists, not having to wait until after 2024.
So if I can summarize, so yes, we did, or if I can just make sure I understand, today we will be reviewing the known uses of pesticide. So your point is, based on those factors, can we start to identify mitigation? Because what we don't have, and what we're going to work with CARB on over the next couple of years, is actual monitoring, which is definitely different than what's being used, what's really being like in this year. So I'm wondering, maybe we can have that, maybe that's something I can pin for DPR to help us address what what do you as DPR need to know to address some of these mitigation concerns that residents have? Do we need to wait for monitoring, or can we do something sooner? So I don't know if DPR has a question now about that, or Gustavo, if I characterized your question correctly.
Yeah, I think, I think you summarized correctly. I think if, because I was thinking, if there is already data that can, enough data, I will say, to maybe to start, planning what mitigations measures can we take with that, at least, on a limited basis, and understanding that after 2024, we will have more information and then maybe implementing other measures. So I think that will be great if we identify, like how we call it, the low hanging fruit.
I don't know, DPR, if you guys have a comment now. I've definitely noted that as something that we should probably address. Maybe answer that question later if we don't have a comment, Min or Aniela.
Sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Sorry, struggling a bit. No, we can come back and talk about it. I'm not completely sure I got all the questions just so but yeah, we can circle back and kind of speak about what we can and can't do and probably present it at a separate time.
So one of the things I've noted your question, Gustavo, I know that DPR is obviously on and we can address it. I also want to note that we do have on here well before that action item about monitoring and then sort of the subsequent actions, we already have on the schedule to talk about statewide mitigation regulation efforts. So we will be talking about that sooner than later. 2024 was just our target for the follow-up to monitoring. So maybe that's an important distinction and something that we can make sure to talk about in the next couple meetings. I do see Bianca's hand.
I have a question in regard that now that you were speaking about monitoring, I know that CARB in the past has done some of the monitoring for DPR. In this circumstances, it would be strictly coming from DPR, or is CARB going to be involved in the monitoring process that is going to be happening in the community? If that's going to be the case, how much technical of the monitor is it going to be, or is it going to be just like a temporary monitor that is left in and maybe like a 24-hour reading, or is it going to be a constant reading that residents could view when there's spraying seasons? I know that we do have in the spring, there's high levels of spraying season, and a lot of contaminants do happen in the community, and we don't know what's out there. So I'm just wondering if we could coordinate with CARB or with DPR to make it feasible that we get an accurate reading. We just don't get it like a temporary reading. If that's going to be the case, then what's the point of actually doing a monitor if it's just going to be one day and that's it? We need something that's more constant, more.
I don't know if CARB or DPR want to start, and maybe I'll just summarize what I know is the overall commitment, and then if Min or Joe or Deldy, someone want to talk from their perspective. But sort of when I described and I'll pull it up really quickly once again here in a second, but from my understanding, the work that we're going to set up today by talking about the pesticide use feeds into analyzing, to your exact point, seasonality and timing, and that feeds into from DPR. DPR gives that information, and maybe even with a WEHA, depending on what's necessary to do kind of the monitoring, gives that information to CARB, and then CARB uses that information about time and type of pesticides to set up the monitoring campaign. From there, I think they're the experts to talk about that. So I don't know if I characterized overall that correctly, but I don't know if CARB or DPR want to take kind of the overall scope of what that monitoring campaign generally, maybe from in ECB looks like, for example.
Jessica, if no other comments, if I don't interrupt others, I just want to follow up on your previous comment about, potential projects. I think you're right, any statewide, efforts, for regulations and new regulations, I think that's great. But also, I think we also keep in mind that for those trying to identify those potential local projects,
Mhm.
maybe, on a kind of pilot projects, but, 617 is to mitigate, the pollution in these specific communities. So I think we need to not only think about statewide, but what can be done locally that, as I said, it may be in a form of a project, pilot project that may not be permanent, but, something that may help us learn, how to mitigate the pollution in our communities. Just wanted to make that note, that I think it will be great for us to consider both, local, actions and statewide actions.
I've noted that. Thank you, Gustavo. And Deldy, I see you've unmuted.
Yeah, I just wanted to make room in the conversation for our colleagues from our monitoring and laboratory division. I think we have a couple of them here. I think it is important at some point to talk about the kind of monitoring. It's not the kind that most of us are used to when we think about, community-based sensor monitoring. And so one of the things we can also do is talk a little bit more about the work that was done in Eastern Coachella Valley with a different steering committee. James, is this something you can talk a little bit about?
Yes, thanks, Dowdy. Yeah, circling back to Bianca's question. So I guess there's different kinds of approaches that we've taken in assistance for DPR. And for ECV, we partnered with OEHA and DPR to figure out the best way to prioritize, I guess, getting the best kind of data that the community can use.
Mm-hmm.
And for that kind of community, we ended up doing, or we actually just started it's a 13-week campaign for we call it intensive seasonal monitoring. So for 13 weeks, we were out in the field for 4 days a week, sampling for 24-hour samples for targeted pesticides that we decided to monitor for, which is based on the high use and also during the season, the high use season for the community. So we haven't really discussed in detail for this particular community, for Arvin and Lamont, but that is a possibility that we're looking at. And I think some of the data that will be presented today will kind of give us more ideas on how we want to approach monitoring for this particular community. I hope that answers your question, Bianca.
And maybe I'll just remind folks, I'm going to pull it up really quickly, and then I'll go to, if you don't mind, Lily, I think Bianca's might be responding directly, and then I'll go to Bianca and then Lily. I'm going to really quickly pull up. We do have on the schedule a time to go in a little more detail about what the next steps could be, and have maybe more of a structured conversation about CARB's efforts, talk a little bit about, we might even want to invite Eastern Coachella Valley community members to talk about it, and then to talk, as James just said, about how today's conversation about the pesticide use and seasonality and timing feeds into the work that CARB wants to do. So I just wanted to remind folks that we did already put it on the schedule, and we look forward to that conversation. So Bianca and then Lily.
I really appreciate, I forgot the gentleman's name. The way he was explaining, it's a 13-week process for a study, but I'm wondering, when that study does come into place, is it going to be in spraying season? I know that in the valley, there's times, actually, my father-in-law, it's a sprayer, so irrigator. So he always tells me that there's always a season when there's a lot of pesticides being applied in a lot of the agriculture. Is it going to be around that time frame where growers are spraying their crops because the new crop is going to come up, or the summer is coming up, and that's when the grapes and everything starts blooming and things like that? I would want to know if you're going to be partnering with the ag commissioner to know exactly if there's a spraying season, how elevated does it contaminate communities, that the community of Arvin and Lamont that have been affected for years, and we really don't know what's happening down here. So my question is, are you going to be collaborating, or is it just going to be an effort from CARB and from DPR? I want to see if there's a connection between all the agency, including the ag commissioner, because he does have a lot of key players in this position when there's spraying season and things like that. So we could see the reality what's happening here in the valley.
Bianca, I think you really well summarized exactly, almost your ask sounds like exactly what's going to happen. And Min, I know I saw you raise your hand, so maybe we can map out ahead of the next meeting the pathway. So we put it in bullet point form, but I think a pathway of who and who the next step is and why they're all interconnected. And Min, can you describe to us not only how the information that we're about to present, it's on the agenda today, the information we're about to present, sort of how that collaboration got us to know that information, and then how that information is used to do exactly what Bianca said, which is let CARB know the highest peak season, the types of pesticides to monitor for, and that can be feed into their campaign for monitoring.
Yeah, that's a great question by Bianca, and I think I want to echo that the team here on our side actually collaborates throughout the different agencies, because there's several different factors that go into these studies, and one of the things that we always harken on is when we do these studies, we typically look at based on usage, and in our conversations with the ag commissioners, we understand what the usage seasons are. So it's a high use season that we typically target, and that's what James was mentioning with the seasonal studies. So during that time, we do that purposely because we know that sampling and monitoring is expensive. So we want to be there when things are actually floating in the air. So that's our kind of first preliminary look. We will actually, because all the usage is registered and documented, we'll take a look at the area and kind of figure out, what's being sprayed, what seasons they're being done at, and at what capacity. And then that way we then circle back with the CARB team and kind of go, okay, what is a feasible protocol? How should we look for this? What science is behind it? What technology do we need behind it? And then we also ping the ag commissioners to ensure that, hey, do we have this right? Has the seasonality in your area changed recently? We typically know from year to year crop rotation and crop usage. So we across the board, we all do our due diligence. It's not done in a vacuum. So I just wanted to kind of give everybody their kudos here, because it's really across the board. We have to, there's a lot that goes into setting up these things, and it's not willy-nilly.
Lily's been so patient, and I know that OEHA has a role in this. So Lily, can you describe a little bit?
It's fine. I actually, a lot of points were taken. So just to echo the point that that collaborative aspect of it is very true. OEHA works with DPR and CARB in supporting AB 617, and a lot of the intersections being community health concerns over pesticides are very much where we can learn from Eastern Coachella. One of the things that OEHA contributed to that initial discussion, working with the monitoring lab division and DPR and even the monitoring working team in Eastern Coachella, is that while there is, techniques to monitor for certain air pollutants, there are also limitations. And so it is really a balance of what we can do with what the science is that we know how to do. But I mean, all those aside, that's not to say hopefully we can't learn something and apply it to similarities in Arvin Lamont that we learned from Eastern Coachella. There are differences though that are very real, like the Salton Sea, which contributes dust that the composition of would be very different to Arvin Lamont. So in the development of trying to figure out which air pollutants to monitor for, that's where the multidisciplinary, multi-agency approach is very helpful.
Thank you, Lily. Go ahead, Bianca.
I'm not saying it might happen, but there's a tendency where there's some elevations happening in the valley, especially because how we are centered, how everything's mapped out. In these circumstances, if there's high elevation of, let's just say, a certain pesticide or a certain chemical or VOC or any type of chemical like pesticides, I'm thinking like a gas or anything of that sort. Is DPR or CARB or the air district going to inform the community immediately, or is going to go through all the process of like research and data and then bring that information down to the community? Because to be honest, it does kill a lot of the time when it goes back and does the review and things like that, instead of giving an immediate advisory to communities that they're being poisoned and this is what's happening, or please stay inside or take precautionary items. Those are the steps that us as individual, I'm counting myself in here, to take that precautionary as residents. If there's going to be any sprayings or any restricted material that is going to be done in the area, to take that notice that we're kind of wanting. So if we're seeing that there's monitoring, but if we don't see any results until a year later, then it doesn't give us any help. If we know it after we've been poisoned or sprayed on, or our children are being affected, I'm just wondering on the timeline, because I know there is going to be a cross collaboration and it's going to take some time. But if there's an immediate danger, can you guys let us know in that case?
I will take a stab at that, Bianca. I think we've spoken about this before in some capacity. When it comes to pesticide monitoring, there's a laboratory component to it. So we do our due diligence to get that data out as fast as possible. But there is a lag time. It's not an instantaneous read like you would get with a PM 2.5 or something along that line. And that science is the same across the board for whoever's monitoring. I think I do share your concern about getting the information out as fast as possible, and we do try to get it out. Our typical lag time with the laboratory getting samples shipped in and whatnot, I think the fastest we typically get it out is between 3 months or so, and that's just the limitation of the science. I think we're trying to combat. I think we're trying to answer a couple of the questions that you brought, Bianca, with informing the public, and that's happening with our statewide notification system that's being implemented. So there's that going on, and then when with either ourselves or with CARB, when monitoring data is available and it's gone through our QA/QC process, we push it out. We don't hold on to it for any reason. And we have our online databases that we push them onto routinely. So happy to go into that more if you have questions on that, but that's kind of typically how we've handled things. And I think we typically share the data once CARB gets it to us as well. So I don't think there's any difference between us or CARB.
I so appreciate everyone answering all these questions. I do know that we have, like I said, we have our next meeting. I just brought that up again, but I'm gonna bring it up one more time. Our next meeting is to talk about some mitigation impacts. To Gustavo's point, we talk about statewide, but maybe we acknowledge some examples of what we can do locally. The meeting after that, we want to talk about monitoring. So I've noted all of these great questions, even though we've answered a lot of them already today. It's just a reminder that when we present a little bit about next steps in monitoring, to make sure we address these, we map out sort of the collaboration, we talk about timeline, we talk about Bianca's point about what is the fastest that we get information back, and how do we alert the community and combine these efforts, right, with the statewide notification. So I'm hearing a lot of great comments about kind of future topics. If there's no immediate questions on the tracker, if it's all right, I'd like to move us along. One of our main questions from last meeting was about something similar actually to what Bianca was just talking about, and that's folks knowing what to do if they think they're exposed or they think they see something that they don't think should be happening. And so we've asked DPR to come to you all with some tools that you can all use, and also some advice for folks about what truly is the next step and who is in charge of kind of responding to those concerns. So I'm going to pass it to DPR for our next agenda item.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. So give me a second. Great. Can everybody see my slides?
Yes.
Great. All right. So hello, everyone. My name is Aniela Barant, and I'm a senior environmental scientist with the AIR program with the Department of Pesticide Regulation. I'm here today to give an update, and I'm going to combine both items on the agenda here in this presentation. So I'm going to first start with who to contact if exposed. The first thing that you can do if exposed is call 911. This is the most important thing you can do. This is why this is bolded and underlined in this presentation. It's the most important thing that you can do for several reasons. One, your health and safety is the most important thing, and that's the fastest way to get you to get medical attention. The other thing is, if it is documented by emergency personnel, they can document this, and then they can refer that case to the county agricultural commissioner, who can take it from there. So that's why it's important to call 911, because there's two reasons that that this will help with this exposure incident. The second thing that you can do is contact your county agricultural commissioner. I've placed the Kern County CAC number here. It's 661-868-6320. The email address for the Ag Commissioner is also shown here. If you are not in Kern County, or if you're unsure what the phone number is, you can call Pest Line, which is an 877 number, and that will direct you to any of the county agricultural commissioners in California. Another thing that you can do is contact DPR directly. I've placed the phone number for DPR here on this slide. It's the 916 number. And I've also provided the email address for CDPR. And here, this is what you can use to also let DPR know if there's a pesticide incident. You can also use the Casper app, which I'll talk about on the next slide. For all of these items, I have some links that I can share to help get you to the Kern County CAC website, some information on who to contact at DPR, and how to download the Casper app. The Casper app is California's system for pesticide incident reporting. This app receives incoming reports of pesticide incidents. It's available in English or Spanish. For this app, you can attach photographs and videos of the incident. This also allows you to capture GPS coordinates and allows for incident tracking along this entire process. A key item here is this can be reported anonymously. It also can be used 24 hours a day and 365 days per year. And again, after I'm done with this presentation, I'll put a link in the chat for the Casper app. So now I want to talk about pesticide use within the Arvin Lamont community. And this is something, of course, that we've just been talking about recently. So this is a pie chart here that represents the percentage of annual use or pesticide use within your community. And it covers the years of 2015 to 2019. The pesticides with the highest percentage of use are MITC, which is technically metam sodium and metam potassium.
I'm going to talk about this pesticide in a couple of slides. This is a fumigant and also a restricted material. There are some other pesticides that are used quite often in the Arvin Lamont community, sulfur and mineral oil. But then we also have 1,3-dichloropropene or 1,3-D, which accounts for about 9% of the use. And so, and then there's other pesticides here, glyphosate, pendimethalin, and over 300 other active ingredients that account for about the rest of the use. Both MITC and 1,3-dichloropropene or 1,3-D are actively monitored by DPR in other sites across California. And this figure here, this can tell us that these are two pesticides that we could potentially target when we start when CARB starts monitoring in Arvin Lamont.
So in particular
for what is used here, I have a map here of the Arvin Lamont community. And this here shows MITC use from 2015 to 2019. However, this map shows average pounds of the MITC applied by section. And so the more of MITC that is used, the darker the blue. So for example, here in this corner, I don't know if you can see my mouse, there's higher MITC use here. Why this is important and why this is why we're showing this to you is we can use this when we start monitoring to target where we want to put monitoring, where we want to set up our monitoring systems. And so this will help us figure that out.
And this next slide here shows 1,3-dichloropropene or
1,3-D use from 2015 to 2019. And again, this is average pounds of 1,3-D applied in a 1 by 1 square mile section. And so again, we can use this map to help figure out exactly where monitoring systems can be placed to determine the concentrations of 1,3-D in the ambient air. I also want to point out that just because there are darker colors in some of these sections, that doesn't mean that we necessarily think there's going to be higher concentrations of 1,3-D in the ambient air or higher concentrations of MITC in the ambient air. This just tells us, okay, this is where we should focus monitoring. So then I have some next steps that I thought might be useful for the group as well. And so this was mentioned earlier in terms of statewide mitigation efforts. Our 1,3-D regulatory package has been submitted to the Office of Administrative Law, and we have a comment period that is open until January 18th, 2023. So if interested, you can comment on that rulemaking package. Of course, and this is why what we've been talking about for the past 40 minutes or so is we're going to continue to support CARB's monitoring team. We can provide them analysis about pesticide use in the area in addition to seasonal analysis that will help us target what seasons to monitor in addition to where we should put those monitoring locations. And then finally, we will provide sustainable pest management information when available. So I just want to end this with, if you have any questions that you want to ask off this meeting about what I just presented, I've Min Pham, his email and phone number are here. He is the chief of the environmental monitoring branch with the Department of Pesticide Regulation. In addition, you can contact my manager, Mazir Candelus, and his email and phone number are found here as well. And so with that, I'm happy to take questions. So I think, oh yeah, Gustavo has his hand up.
Yeah, I was thinking there are some community concerns, for example, and connected to maybe other, SERPs, other projects. For example, the green barriers, from community's perspective,
when we are talking about green barriers, I think two main reasons that the community is suggesting the green barriers is for both, to have some protections from pesticides, being the pesticide application near residential areas. But the other one is the dust that comes out of agricultural operations. And I was thinking, is there a chance to combine or figure out, how can we maybe capitalize on some of those opportunities? How can we capture, or monitor not only pesticides, but the dust? And I don't know if, the dust pollution is capturing one of these other, VOCs or these other monitor, pollution, monitoring other kind of pollution. But I was thinking, maybe just consider, not only talking about pesticides, but potentially maybe how can we combine, the green barriers and taking some actions also in combination with, reducing pesticide exposure, maybe combining those two kind of SERPs, to capitalize on maybe one issue that more than one SERP can help reduce pollution to the communities. I don't know if I was clear enough.
Go ahead, Daniela, and then I can answer.
Oh, I was actually just going to ask you to step in because I think that would be better answered by you.
Yes, absolutely. Gustavo, that's a really great point. And I think I have two. First, I wrote that down as and started as just a good reminder that we need to think of multiple things when we address some of these CERT projects. I think that's a good reminder. The second is, and I think it kind of gets to Emma's point, who also rose her hand, is the second is taking a look at that map that DPR has put together, combining it with the map that we have from the district about all of the other sources, and combining it, we're actually going to talk at our meeting next week, our regular meeting in person, as a reminder, about getting from you all where we want to start prioritizing green barrier projects. I think it's a good reminder that we need to look at all of these things to kind of combine and overlay all of them, right? And kind of use that as our guiding light. So I wrote that down as a reminder to put DPR's map in with all of the other tools we use to identify vegetative barriers projects.
Thank you.
And then Emma had a question in the chat, but she also rose her hand. So maybe we'll just go to Emma next.
Yes, hi, thank you so much, Jessica. So a few questions, but first, thank you for the information on the MITC and the 1,3D. That's really informative and helpful for us to know. I am a little discontent with the information on how to report. I was hoping to get further information on what the protocol would be on reporting exposure if you're working, for example, or if kids are at school, because I know residents have raised that sometimes during school hours, kids have been exposed to pesticides. And also would like to know what is the protocol after it's reported to DPR and after it's been reported to Mr. Glenn. So I don't know if right now is the appropriate time to talk about those next steps, or if it's helpful to maybe add it to a future agenda to discuss what the local procedures would be and what that follow-up would look like, and also what's the enforcement that happens after that, right? Because we want to make sure that if folks are being exposed, that the person responsible is being reprimanded for that exposure.
Yeah, so the number one thing, if there's an exposure incident at a school, for example, is just to call 911, and that way the kids can get that medical attention, and then that the medical, the doctors and nurses, they can document what occurred. After that, I think Min might be better at answering this question because he's a little bit more familiar with that process. So Min, if you want to jump in here and answer the rest of that question.
Yeah, sure. So the process is essentially there is a medical evaluation that happens, right? So if you believe that there's an exposure to yourself, or if a worker on scene happens to feel any kind of adverse effects, medical attention is administered first. So that's first and foremost, and that documentation is taken down. And there's actually a couple of different pathways that it gets, no matter what. Usually these incident reports will get facilitated or passed down to both DPR's enforcement staff, our worker health and safety team if it has to do with the workers, and goes straight to the county agricultural commissioners as well. So within that, next steps are investigatory. So there's interviews that happen. If it's a worker incident, there's surrounding areas that are taking a look at and kind of getting into kind of the nuance of this. But essentially, investigatory efforts are made across the board. Interviews are made so that we understand what people saw, heard, felt, so that we can make assessments about the area. And then, from there, if there's any adverse action that needs to happen, it typically could be something along the lines of a legal, it could potentially become a legal matter. And at that point, we typically hand it over and our enforcement teams take care of it. That one I'm not as familiar with, because with those, obviously not a lot of detail comes out because of legal issues, court issues, whatnot, so that they don't, they do their due diligence, so it doesn't like go away. But there are penalties that are invoked thereafter if the legal process finds that it was due to negligence or due to whatever it is. I think I tackled all that, Emma. Does that sound? Anything else I missed?
Thank you. No, yeah, that was helpful. I think you captured everything. Two more questions, if it's okay. What's the school's role in it if kids are exposed on campus? And then also, would it be possible for y'all to provide us in writing, like what that procedure looks like, whether it be like a flow chart or something, please?
You're talking about the processing of from when like an exposure is. Yeah, I think we have a couple of things, maybe, or I might be able to piece something together with more bullet points, kind of give you an outline. As far as the school, I can't speak for the school. I'm not completely sure what they do, but I believe they do. It again, if they believe that an incident has occurred, they are to notify medical staff and immediately, have the children come indoors. I assume medical staff come about. And then I believe the school would then do their due diligence with contacting parents and whatnot. So I'm not going to speak for the school, unfortunately. I don't know their process, but I know with my kids, if ever an ambulance or a medical team is called, I'm immediately notified. So I assume that'd be the same case.
Okay, thank you.
I also wanted to answer your question in the chat, Emma. You said if it is not, I did not capture the reasoning for the darker shades. If it is not illustrating concentration, what is it illustrating and why would it be prioritized? This is just the average amount of that particular pesticide that is used per year. And so this is just to help us identify where we can monitor for that pesticide. So for example, because of limited budgets and limiting equipment, we wouldn't be able to monitor everywhere. So this would tell us exactly where we should find a place to monitor in that particular section.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead, Bianca.
I kind of had the same question as Emma, but after her questioning, I kind of have another. So I have a question for me. In this circumstances, when there is an exposure, who's gonna notify the school what kind of chemical is being applied so the child is being treated correctly? When there's an exposure, I'm talking because I just recently picked up my daughter, and it's right in front of a field, El Camino. And there's been a controversy between like the school and the grower that he's always changing crops constantly. It's like throughout the year, but we don't know how much he's fumigating in the area. And the principal, because I'm part of the PTA, the principal doesn't even know anything at all. And we've asked her constantly, like, hey, what are our children are being exposed? And her answer is like, the grower does not notify me of anything. My question now is for the ag commissioner. Are you still, or is there still the rule of the grower notifying any schools when there's any type of pesticide, like a yearly notification of all the chemicals that are going to be applied? Is that still going on? And if so, why are some of the schools not being notified? Because my daughter's school is not being notified at all. And it's right next adjacent, it's just across the street from her school. And my daughter, she just got out of campus maybe an hour ago, and that could be a window. So I want to know if it's still going on. Does DPR know if it's still going on? Can somebody shine a light on that?
Yes, it's still going on. It's a requirement statewide for annual notification to schools. The school has a responsibility to sign up for the program and to log in to get those notifications. And if your school is not getting them, and if your school has a problem and doesn't think that they're getting them, call my office and we'll help them set it up.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you, Bianca. I just want folks to know I'm taking action items. I'm about to drop them in the chat so they can be translated. But just, I know there's still time on the agenda, but I just want to summarize so far from this meeting. We want sort of a flow chart of steps of how we go from understanding the inventory to working with CARB about monitoring, and then the mitigation, sort of the flow chart of how we go from where we are today to getting monitoring out there. We also want to put a flow chart of steps from exposure to reporting to enforcement to sort of follow up to Emma's question. I have an action item about using a map of pesticide use that was just displayed as one of our tools when we talk about vegetative barriers. And then I have a step that we can follow up not only with Bianca, but anyone else involved in schools, of making sure you know to reach out to the ag commissioner's office if you feel like the school isn't getting properly notified, because we just got confirmation that that is an active ongoing process with the ag commissioner's office. So I'm not trying to cut off the conversation. We have plenty more time, but I just wanted to remind folks of where we stood, and I'm going to drop those in the chat right now. Any other questions for Aniela or Min about the presentation that was just given? Bianca.
I forgot to ask a question in regards to the reporting. So when it comes to DPR and the ag commissioner to respond to any incidents and how much is the fine, does it have a timeline of when all the process could be closed? Let's just say like there's a case that there was a grower that sprayed maybe a neighborhood. Does it take more than a year or longer, or how long is the process for somebody to see a result when they're being affected? Sometimes we do get discouragements of like, oh, it's going to take forever if I report it. What is the time frame, and how much approximately are the fines? Because I've seen that fines are super low compared to the extreme damage that they do when people are being exposed to pesticides.
As far as timelines, obviously that's a case by case incident, and depending on the severity and the incident, it changes. So I don't have a specific time on that. I do know that as far as severity, obviously, if it's a larger case, it may take a little bit more time for it to go through actual court hearings. So there's different things. So it's unfortunately, I'm going to have to say it's case by case. And Bianca, I'm sorry, I completely forgot about that second part. Can you repeat that part of your question?
The fines approximately are fines. I know they're case by case, but what is like the highest number? Because I've seen the amount of fines that are given, and they're very low compared to the damage that do happen in the community and or the people that are being exposed. So I'm wondering how much, so we could at least have a clarity that how much is our time in reporting these type of incidents.
Again, it's case by case, and I don't know the exact amounts. I do know, I mean, I think DPR just went through a court case with Amazon, and that was in the millions as far as the settlement. I'm not sure what was all a piece of that. But I mean, it depends on the infraction and depends on what it is. You know, if it's something like a labeling, I'm sorry, not labeling, a documentation issue, that holds a different weight than if there was negligence. And I'm also going to drop this website into the chat here about our pesticide illness surveillance program. I think this is will kind of speak to what Emma asked us as well. This is how we monitor and provide transparency when it comes to incidents with workers. So this is kind of gives you a little bit of information on what is done, how physicians, medical advisors, county, and how we are all kind of involved in the grand scheme of when an illness happens.
Thank you, Min. I do know that on our proposed schedule, we will eventually have, obviously there's so many different topics, right? We just went over all of the different commitments. We are hoping to talk in detail at a future meeting about enforcement of the pesticide regulations and kind of follow up. So I took your note down, Bianca, of your question and even related question from Emma about maybe we can use that to prepare for that upcoming discussion topic, where we'll spend more time, have a presentation about enforcement and specifically how that's handled, how we can use you all to be transparent about that process. So. Oops, I heard someone, but I think I might mute whoever was just talking, but I do say Jesus Alonso's hand.
Hi, yeah. I just had a quick question on the pesticide notification for the schools. Is there a public list to be able to see what schools have signed up for this pesticide notification? And is there a way for residents to be able to get that information as well?
Oh, go ahead, Glenn.
So I would say that, so the onus is on the school or the school district. So below that, the impetus for them to take action would be on the part of the parents. So the parents need to tell the school district that they're concerned about this. Hey, have you signed up? My son goes to this school. Have you signed up for notification? And if you haven't, I want you to do it. If you have, I want you to tell me that information. So the contact is directly with the school district and to ask them whether they've signed up or not. And if they haven't, pressure them to do it. And this has been the case for the last 3 years.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think if we had a public access to the schools or school districts that have signed up to the notification system, we'd be able to hold them better accountable to be part of it and to share that information with parents. That would be possible.
Well, in my mind, it doesn't really matter whether they've signed up or not. Start the process by contacting them and asking them if they've done it. And because even if they have, that doesn't complete the transaction. They still need to disseminate that information if the parents want it. And so you would still need to pressure them in that way. So even if you know that they've signed up, maybe they're not disseminating the information. So the first step is to contact them and say, have you signed up? And if they haven't, say, sign up and tell me. And if they have, say, well, why haven't you been telling me?
I just noted, it sounds like, from the ag commissioner to the school, even if that's there, it really is on the school to get the information out to parents and beyond. And so I just noted that as an action item, maybe for us to follow up on. It sounds like some folks here are involved with schools, and maybe you, as a case study, we can kind of see if maybe the school in particular, Bianca, as an example, you can not only follow up and see if they're signed up, but then ask them what they're doing. And we can maybe use that to build within this subcommittee an understanding of what the schools are doing. And then maybe we can, from there, take some actions together to try to see how we can better, let the schools know what their role is in this process. And Emma, please.
Thanks. Sorry, I just wanted to reiterate the question from Jesus. I don't think it was directly answered. He was asking if there is a website where schools that have signed up the schools that have signed up for this notification is publicly available. I'm assuming no, based on your answer, Glenn.
I don't have a site like that, so I would have to defer to DPR whether they have that or not.
Okay.
But again, let me reiterate, the issue isn't with the list is unimportant.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is that every school has to be notified. And so every grower that's near a school notifies annually. So therefore every school can sign up if they choose to do so. If they haven't, for whatever reason, they don't want to, or they haven't been pressured to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Bianca, please.
I've shared my concerns a couple times with Glenn in regards to this list. I know that this is something that at least gives us a clarity of what kind of chemicals are being applied near our children's school. But the problem here is that we don't know when is it going to be applied, at what time. It doesn't give us a clarity. It just gives us a list of just a simple list of all the chemicals. As Glenn one time told me we met, he said, it's a probability that they might spray it. It might be a probability they won't spray it. It's all based on what the grower decides to do. He could put 1 million chemicals in the list, but we don't know how much is going to be applied or when is it going to be applied. That is a problem with this list. At least we have a clarity, but we don't know how much. The problem that I do have is if we could have a public request of how much has been applied in the previous years, so in the upcoming years we could at least, I'm talking about myself as a PTA mom, where we could inform the principal and telling her like, hey, these type of chemicals are being applied around this time of year, so you could at least prevent those exposures if it does happen. Because we really don't know anything at this point. And if we could have at least some transparency or some collaboration or some work that we could do with the ag commissioner, I would really appreciate that, because for now, I'm thinking not as a community base. I'm thinking of our children that are being exposed, our elderly that are sensitive receptors that have been affected for years, and we don't know anything. So I'm pleading here for Glenn to see if there could be some work that we could do. I know that he in the past has not been happy about the notification, but if we could work something out because of being a 617 community and see the transparency, that would really make a difference in this community.
So if you'll recall, back in February, I had a document that was emailed to all the members of the committee and is also posted on the 617 website. My office went to a substantial amount of work to accumulate exactly what you're saying, which is a history of what's applied in the AB 6117 Arvin Lamont community, and an example of specific materials that are applied on specific crops at different times of year, and you have that information. So I suggest that you go back to the website where it's still posted, a letter from me, and you can reference the files that we gather related to that. Now, as far as specific application information about when, what, where, that's the issue that the statewide notification is going to take care of.
I appreciate Glenn, you answering Bianca's question. I did just drop the letter that Glenn just referenced in the chat. There is an English version and a Spanish version. And I will acknowledge we will continue to hear at future meetings the updates on the statewide notification system, which I recognize is a developing issue. We are about almost a year away, which is obviously not as soon as, you know, tomorrow, but it is coming up quickly that notification system will be required statewide, which will be much more specific, it sounds like, than the current even school program that exists. So we'll continue to work with DPR to get you all updates on that program. I do see that Min unmuted, so I'll go to you, Min, and we'll go from there. And then after that, I do see a comment in the chat.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of wrap up and kind of piggyback off it. I as far as this statewide notification system is concerned, it doesn't matter if Glenn is happy or not. It's going to be implemented statewide, so it's going to be available for everybody to use. To Bianca's point, I think when you're asking about usage around an area, that's something that DPR does provide annually. We do have PUR, pesticide use reporting annually, so you can actually take a look statewide to see what is where, what is being used where. But to Glenn's point, he also did put out that document as well. So I think a lot of this information is floating around, and I think if there needs to be some assistance in kind of pointing people to the right direction, you know, we're more than happy to do that. And I also dropped into the chat a document that a press release really about how DPR has handled a large violation, and you can kind of see what goes into that. I think it's 3 or 4 separate violations, but you can see the dollar amount and kind of the due diligence that happens with that. So that's in there, and I'm happy to discuss anything else about that as well.
Thanks, Min. I am not sure if this is better for Glenn or for Min. There is a comment from Emma in the chat about resident testimony who felt that they were exposed, they reported it, and didn't feel that they were kind of properly responded to. And they want to know how they could have been maybe informed about the exposure, kind of what else they could have done, or what maybe the next steps were. I know that this isn't a very specific, I mean, there's some context here. Obviously, this isn't a super specific example. So Glenn, if you could just in general, maybe address kind of this general concern. And like I said, I know we're going to be talking about this at future meetings.
Yeah, and I think just to circle back around, the whole point is, you know, how to report. Call 911. If there's any question, oh, I don't know if it should go to the fire department or the CHP or BPD or wherever, it doesn't matter. Call 911, they'll figure out how to route it. We will get contacted, we will instigate an investigation. I can't address specific incidents that were not reported to my department. And so therefore, that's why I would always default to call 911. If 911 knows about it, there's a record, and my department will know about it, and my department will investigate in addition to other investigations by environmental health, by anybody else that may be affected. So that's the only suggestion I have with specific incidents that maybe didn't get handled in a certain way. I don't know. All I can say to that is my department wasn't involved. I don't know about it. If I knew about it, I could make a comment about it. So 911, 911, 911, 911.
That is a good reminder. Can I ask, just curiously, if folks went just straight to the emergency department or sought medical care from an emergency rather than call 911, maybe for reasons kind of personally about you know, working with authorities or calling 911, is that once they're in the emergency department, is it up to the healthcare provider to provide all that information, Min, that you spoke about earlier, So would that serve the same purpose if they went directly to an emergency room to seek medical attention, emergency medical attention, or does it have to go through 911 for that to be reported to you all?
No, it doesn't have to go through 911. The medical professional, if they're told that the person is working in an industrial capacity and could have been exposed to pesticides, then it's under their purview and they're required to notify poison control, which then sets in motion a notification to DPR and my department, and we investigate all of those. So you're right, it's not required that they go to 911. If they seek medical attention outside of 911, does it get reported? Yes.
Excellent, that's super helpful. And like I said in my action items earlier, we will have a flow chart of kind of a little bit more detail to Emma's really early on question about from exposure to what to do to enforcement to action. We'll make sure to clarify that there. It's 911 or seek emergency medical attention, however you need to. According to Glenn and Minz, you've heard it from several folks, it will get to the right people because those healthcare providers are required to report it. There is a process for that. So that's really, really helpful. We have a few more minutes if there's any follow-up questions. We have a lot of great notes, I think, to set us up for our next few meetings. So I, as always, have been coordinating with our co-leads. All of these agency partners were responsible for helping us set up this meeting today and will certainly help us for our next meeting. So I think I think we feel like we have a lot of great information to set us up. But I just wanted to save a little bit of space if there's any questions. We might not be able to address them today, but any last thoughts before maybe we give ourselves a few extra minutes of our evening? Jesus.
Just building a little bit on what I was talking about earlier. I actually want to, so it sounds like there isn't a list of schools that have signed up for notification. Would it be possible to have a public list of schools that have signed up for notification? That way it could be used as a tool for parents to hold schools accountable. I think that, it's a great idea. And if we can't have a list, I would definitely like to know why we wouldn't be able to have a public list of schools. Thank you.
Just to answer that really quickly, Jesus. All schools are required. I mean, all schools are part of the system. So I think it's one of those things where you could just, I mean, the simplest thing is just to Google all the schools in the area because everybody will get that notification. It's whether or not they sign on to see the notification. I think is the question that we're asking. And I think if the concern is to leverage the school to participate in that, I think that's really part of like the due diligence of the community, the parents and whatnot, to have that discussion with the school, the district, the administrator, because the notifications will come out regardless to all the schools. It's just a matter of whether or not they are they've logged on essentially. Like it's like an email, right? Like it gets sent to everybody, but if you're not logging on to look at it, then what is the value of that?
I know that we already have a list of the schools in the boundaries. So what we can do just to kind of facilitate this discussion is if it's okay with you, I mean, I know you said it, they're all required to, so as long as there's no discrepancy, if we get that list and there's no feeling, Min or Glenn, I don't know who the proper person is, but from Min's perspective, I guess from DPR, if there's no feeling that any of those aren't on the list, then we'll post that list, and that can be our basis, right, for this group to know these are the schools we need to be following up with, like as a community, to say, hey, look, you are automatically signed up for these. We know you're on here. What's kind of follow through or what support do they need to know? Do they know how to log on? Are they part of that program? So we can definitely get that started by providing the list that we already have. So adding that to another action item, but I do see Gracia.
Hi, thank you. I guess I just have a suggestion for a future action item or in addition to this worksheet or flowchart that DPR is developing. If there could be any additional information or resources available for folks who might be uninsured and hesitant to go and receive medical services for being exposed as well. Again, just additional clarifying information for folks that might be hesitant to reach out to resources like 911. I think it would be a little more well-rounded and helpful for individuals affected. Thank you.
I've noted that, Gracia, to give when we follow up with DPR on the action item for that flow chart, just maybe we can all collaborate or try to get a better understanding of what kind of different options for different folks are. So I think that's important to keep in mind. All right, well, if there's anything else in between, please reach out to any one of us. And other than that, our next regular meeting is next Tuesday. It is in person. We are primarily focused on some high priority incentives measures, as well as just any questions you have. We're going to bring a ton of people from a ton of different parts of the district, from the city and county, to talk mostly about incentives. Carb will be there. It's going to be really exciting. We have food. We're going to have some things for children, some things for the holidays. It's going to be a really great meeting, and we look forward to those of you who can make it. We'll also just provide a quick update for those that weren't at today's meeting at the meeting next week, but we're primarily going to focus on other measures besides the great discussion that we had tonight. Well, I look forward to seeing those of you we get to see in person. I hope that everyone had a great Thanksgiving, had time to be with family. Thank you all so much for being here, all the agency partners, and have a good rest of your night, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, y'all.
Good night.